Why do people consider sumo deadlift cheating? And do you? Well, they consider it cheating because it is cheating.
I think we're well acquainted. Chris? You really did a number, didn't you? Say sumo isn't cheating, Chris. Simple. Sumo isn't cheating. Say it. Say it, Chris.
I consider sumo deadlift cheating.
You'll talk. You'll talk. You'll see. They always do. Is the sumo deadlift cheating? This is an idea that's been gaining popularity in the online fitness community over the last few years. So in this video, I want to take a look at the most common arguments for why sumo is cheating, and then see if they hold up against the scientific evidence. First, just to get everyone on the same page, a conventional deadlift is when you lift a barbell off the ground with your legs inside your hands, usually just closer than shoulder width, and a sumo deadlift is when you lift the weight with your legs outside your hands. Both lifts are then executed through a combination of knee extension, where the quads straighten the legs out, and hip extension, where the glutes and hamstrings straighten the hips out. There'll also be high muscle activation in the forearms as you grip the bar, and high activation in the spinal erectors of the back, which prevents excessive rounding of the spine. Now, when people say sumo is cheating, I don't think they mean it's literally cheating. Maybe a few people do, but according to the International Powerlifting Federation rulebook, there is no stance width rule, and the sumo deadlift isn't cause for disqualification. So it's perfectly legal in the sport, and this is standard across virtually all powerlifting federations, both tested and untested. So that's not really the issue. Instead, what people really mean by cheating is that the sumo stance makes the lift easier compared to the conventional stance. It's a shortcut to lift more weight, perhaps more similar to doing a half rep or a 3/4 rep on the squat. So to see if it is a cheat code for lifting more weight, let's take a look at some data from the IPF World Powerlifting Championships, where you have the best and most incentivized lifters in the world trying to deadlift as much weight as possible for both themselves and their respective countries. This is the percentage of male lifters in the 93 kilo or 205 pound weight class who deadlifted using a conventional stance, and this is the percentage of lifters who used a sumo stance. If sumo really was a cheat code, why would the majority of lifters choose not to use it? For comparison, let's look at another technique that people also consider cheating: arching on the bench press. This really seems to help lifters move more weight. So what's the percentage of lifters who used some kind of arch at that same competition? Oh, it's all of them. 100% of lifters use some kind of arch on the bench press because arching really does seem to help pretty much everyone lift more weight. But with sumo, it just isn't the same. Some lifters are a bit stronger with sumo, others are a bit stronger with conventional. But that isn't quite the full picture, because if we expand the data out, we do see a pretty clear trend. Looking over here at the second lightest weight class, we can see that about 75% of lifters pull sumo. And if we look at the super heavyweight class, it flips. Only 25% pull sumo and 75% pull conventional. So there's a pretty clear trend that as you get heavier, the worse sumo seems to work for you. Now, the female data isn't quite as clear. It's closer to 50-50 in the middle, but at the extremes, you once again do see that sumo is better for the lighter lifters and conventional is better for the heavier lifters. Now, there's a bunch of theories as to why this is the case. Most people say it's likely either a mobility issue or a skeleton thing, where the biggest lifters are also the tallest lifters, and maybe taller lifters have less favorable limb ratios for sumo. The bottom line is that if sumo was truly a shortcut to lifting more weight, every high-level lifter would use it, but they don't. It simply depends on the person and their individual leverages. Did you say something? You say something about range of motion? What did you say, Chris?
I consider sumo deadlift cheating.
Heard you mumble something about range of motion. What was that?
I consider it cheating.
Kiwi, Chris. Have some carbohydrates, Chris. You're looking catabolic. Really catabolic.
It is cheating.
So what about range of motion? Surely taking a wider stance will reduce range of motion, which should be worse from a general muscle and strength standpoint, right? Well, I decided to measure this for myself. When I pull with a conventional stance, the bar moves 19 inches off the ground, and when I pull with a sumo stance, it moves 16 inches off the ground. So the barbell's range of motion was 3 inches shorter with sumo for me. I was curious how this changed with height, so I paid a random tall guy at my gym to let me measure the difference for him as well. For him, the bar moved 22.5 inches with the conventional stance and 21 inches with sumo. So for him, the range of motion was actually only 1.5 inches shorter with sumo. In all, sumo meant about a 15% decrease in range of motion for me, and about a 7% decrease for that random tall dude. That's actually less of a difference than I was expecting. Still, there are a few things to point out here. First, shorter range of motion doesn't necessarily equal easier, because lifters can offset any small reduction in ROM with an increase in weight if it gives them a strength boost. For example, my sumo range of motion is 15% shorter, but I also lift about 15% more weight whenever I pull sumo. So my overall exertion, or RPE, ends up being about the same. Again, not everyone will see a strength boost by pulling sumo, but if you do, you simply adjust the weight to match relative intensity. We also need to consider which part of the range is being cut short when we pull sumo. For comparison, just think about a full depth squat versus a half squat. The hardest part of the squat is clearly the bottom half. You almost never see someone failing a squat in the top half of the range. So even if you load more weight, you're still skipping the most difficult part of the lift when you do a half squat. By contrast, when you do a sumo deadlift, you still have to hit the hardest parts of the range. Most people fail a deadlift either on the floor, they just can't get the weight moving, or they'll get it to the knees, but then fail to lock it out. And whether you pull sumo or not, you still have to hit both of those points in the lift. And the latest evidence suggests that hitting the hardest part in the range of motion is actually more important than just increasing the range overall. I'd also point out that people who think range of motion is a big deal with sumo often don't apply that same logic to other exercises. The conventional equivalent on the bench press would be a close shoulder width grip. And every time you go outside shoulder width, you decrease the range of motion. But no one considers everything outside of a close grip cheating on the bench press. The same goes for lat pull downs. Every inch you go wider than shoulder width, the range of motion decreases. But everyone knows that's not a big deal. You might activate the back muscles slightly differently by going a bit wider, but as long as you're getting sufficiently close to failure, I can't imagine anyone saying that a wider grip lat pull down is cheating. But even with all that aside, there's another big issue with the range of motion debate, which is that there's a difference between the barbell's vertical range of motion and the range of motion at individual joints. For example, even though the barbell does travel slightly less distance with sumo, the knees actually go through a larger range of motion. With conventional, you can see that the knees are not nearly as bent in the starting position, and they don't go through a big range of motion at all. It's actually more similar to a half squat. But with sumo, the knee angle starts much deeper, and then there's a larger knee extension range of motion throughout the lift. This means that the quads do have to work a bit harder with sumo in order to overcome that extra demand. At the hips, it sort of flips, where you can see that the conventional lift does use more hip range of motion when viewed from this 2D perspective. However, the hips are quite a bit more complex than the knees because the knee is a simple hinge joint, whereas the hip is a ball and socket joint. This means it allows the leg to move in 3 dimensions. So when we analyze the biomechanical demands at the hip, we need to consider its actions in 3D. And this is exactly what this 3D kinematic study from Escamilla and colleagues did. And without getting too lost in the details, they essentially found that at no point in the range of motion was there a significant difference in hip extension demands between sumo and conventional. They were pretty much exactly the same at the hips. And this is probably why EMG research shows no difference in hamstring or glute activation between sumo and conventional. They're both the same. So what is the difference between them? Well, there's 2 things. As we already said, the quads do have to work a bit harder with sumo, and then the spinal erectors that run up the back do have to work a bit harder with conventional. And I think this could be why some people perceive conventional as being harder subjectively. You are lifting with your back more, and there very well could be something about stressing the back slightly more that makes it feel harder than stressing the quads slightly more. But to say it objectively is harder as a matter of biomechanics, relative intensity, or overall muscle activation just isn't based on sound evidence. The actual physiological differences between the two are much smaller than many realize. So, to wrap it up, which style of deadlift should you use? Well, if you're a lighter lifter, say under 180 pounds or about 81 kilos as a male, or under 140 pounds or about 65 kilos as a female, chances are you might be better at sumo. And if you're above that, you might be better at conventional. But the only way to know for sure is to try out both and see which one you feel better at. It can take time to learn the technique, so I'd recommend giving it at least a month or two before making an assessment. And then, given just how similar the two lifts are, I'd recommend just going with the one that you feel stronger with, or the one that you feel more comfortable with, or you can use both. Or you can use gradually get stronger on both over time. Hello?